It's actually on my
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad everybody found a seat. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Wafaa El-Sadr. I'm the Global ICAP Director, and I welcome you to recognition of World AIDS Day today. So thank you all for coming today to share this program with us. I'm going to start with a little bit of a background about World AIDS Day, and specifically about the theme of our World AIDS Day and the Global World AIDS Day theme this year. And then I'll go through the rest of the program with you. So for those of you who are as old as I am, you might remember, or older, very few in this audience, will remember that World AIDS Day is always celebrated on December 1st of every year. And the purpose of World AIDS Day has multiple purposes in my mind. I think one of them is to look back, and the second is to see where we're at today, and the third purpose is to look ahead. And I think personally, when I look back, it's World AIDS Day for me is always a moment of reflection, as I think about a lot of the travails and of the last 30 years in terms of confronting this epidemic, and I feel it's a moment when we honor a lot of the people who we have lost due to HIV, both here in this country and around the world. I think also it's a moment today to acknowledge the progress that has been made, and there's been immense progress that has been accomplished over the past 30 years or more, and I'll show you some of this progress, but enormous progress in terms of many different dimensions, in terms of confronting the epidemic, in terms of advancing treatment, advancing prevention, advancing the engagement of communities in this battle against HIV. And then also it's a moment of looking ahead and thinking about what are the challenges that remain, what else do we need to do, and to think collectively together as to what we should focus on as we look ahead in order that we can really bring this epidemic to an end. So I hope that all of you will be sharing your thoughts, each of your individual thoughts, as you reflect back on the past, on today, on the future, in the context of the global HIV pandemic. And the HIV, every year, UNAIDS identifies a theme for World AIDS Day, and the theme this year is Knowledge is Power. And actually we selected the title of our World AIDS event this year, Knowledge is Power, before they came out with their report. So we were ahead of them. So I was kind of surprised when I was on a call that they were launching their report, and I saw this, I wanted to say, we got it first. And nonetheless, I think we're completely in sync with our focus today, with the global focus by UNAIDS, which is that knowledge is power. So let's talk about a little bit about where we're at and what has been accomplished. So it's estimated today there are about 37 million people who are living with HIV around the world. And very importantly, HIV touches every region of the world and every country in the world. There's no doubt about that. But I think we also know that there are certain regions of the world that have been disproportionately affected by the epidemic. And as you can, it's estimated about 60% of people living with HIV reside in sub-Saharan Africa. But also you can see from this slide, substantial, about 5.2 million people living with HIV in Asia and the Pacific. And in the US and North America in general, it's estimated about 1 million people are living with HIV. So we have a substantial epidemic in our country, and I think that's very important, and you'll see that's why we're focusing part of our program today on the domestic HIV epidemic. So accomplishing, the millions and millions and millions of people around the world who are living with HIV, and I think what's been accomplished over the past several years, and I don't have a slide for this, is how treatment has been expanded. And over the past several decades now, almost more than 20 million people living with HIV have access to treatment, which is a remarkable achievement, particularly when you take into account that the majority of those individuals are from some of the poorest countries around the world. Now, in order to try to gauge how much progress we're making in terms of confronting the epidemic, UNAIDS came up with this concept, and you'll hear of it today, the 1990 targets. And to give you a sense about what these targets are about, oops, get this move too fast. The global targets are to be reached by 20. Sorry, very sensitive. To be reached by, the goal is that to reach the target of 90 by the year 2020, which is coming up soon. And then hopefully if we achieve those targets, we'll be able to essentially control the epidemic by 2030. So 1999 is an important number to keep in mind, and I'll tell you what it stands for. Many of you are aware. So the goal is that for the first 90, that 90% of people who are living with HIV will actually be aware of their HIV positive status. So that's the power of knowledge of status. And then the second 90 is that 90% of people living with HIV who know their status will actually be on treatment, have initiated treatment. And the third 90 is that 90% of people who are aware of their status on treatment will be able to achieve durable viral suppression, meaning the virus is controlled. So that's a measure of how we're doing in terms of testing and how we're doing in terms of getting people on treatment. So how are we doing? We have achieved a lot, and you can see the achievements here in this, in the orange bars, is that we've achieved a lot in terms of reaching the 90, but there remain gaps. And you can see the gap here. We have a gap of 5.7 million people that are living with HIV that still are unaware of their HIV positive status. And then you can see the gap again to reaching the first and second 90 being on treatment is about 8 million people. And then the three 90s, we have a gap of almost close to 10 million people. So we have a long way to go, but I think the message, the most important thing is that progress has been achieved, but gaps remain. So over time, when we get back to knowledge of status, which is knowledge of being HIV positive or HIV negative, there's been over the years from 2015 here in the first bar to 2017, the testing gap is in the orange, and you can see over time there's been a decrease in the testing gap. But nonetheless, about 25% again of people are unaware of their HIV, who are living with HIV are unaware of their HIV infection. So while progress has been made, again, substantial proportions still need to be aware of their HIV positive status. What about prevention? I think there's also been a lot of progress has been achieved, and here you can see over time the number of new HIV infections globally, and from a height up here of more than 2 million people, substantially more than 2 million people who are new infections per year. We've decreased that, but not as much as we wanted to. The last data show that about 1.8 million people newly acquired or were diagnosed with HIV infection in 2017. That's a substantial number of individuals. And of course, our goal is to actually have less than 500,000 per year. So we have a long way to go in terms of achieving the prevention gap. So there are treatment gaps and there are prevention gaps. So now knowing one's status is very critical. And you start with the population, like here, whether it be in the general population or population at risk, what we call sometimes key populations at risk, vulnerable young women, men who have sex with men, people who inject drugs, or others. And then testing is very fundamental, because testing identifies a person who's positive, and that person then needs to be rapidly engaged in HIV care and treatment, and to achieve undetectable viral load and stay with suppressed viral load for the rest of their life. And the reason is because they get individual benefits from viral suppression. They are able to live well and live long, and also because viral suppression also is associated with decreasing the risk of transmission to somebody else. So treatment is prevention. At the same time also, testing is very important to identify people who are negative, and these individuals then, if they're at risk for HIV, should have access to prevention. And we're very fortunate that now we have several prevention tools in our prevention toolbox, including pre-exposure prophylaxis, PrEP, including voluntary medical male circumcision, including condoms, including harm reduction and other methods for prevention. And it's very critical to, again, sustain people, maintain them on their prevention methods for the long term so they can remain HIV negative. So we're fortunate to get to knowledge of status. We have a lot of testing approaches. We have a lot of innovations in testing, and you'll hear about them today from our speakers. There's index testing, meaning going from somebody who's positive and then trying to test the people in the in their partners, in their households, in their community. There's facility, a health facility to test people who arrive at the health facility. There's household screening that's been tried in many countries. There's mobile unit testing that's also been tried as well. And now we have, one of our tools is also HIV self-testing. And I think if you go to the table outside, as you walked in, you will have access to some self-testing kits. So please feel free to use them and to encourage others to use them. Just want to end by focusing on one particular issue, which is in particular key populations. By key populations, I mean people who are men who have sex with men, or people who inject drugs and others, they lag behind in testing, and that's a very important population that we should focus on. As you can see here, they really lag behind. But as I mentioned, it's very important to also to identify those who are negative. A lot of the knowledge of status is focused only on the positives, but I think we need to remember access to prevention intervention and staying on prevention interventions, particularly PrEP now which is available, and we'll hear about that, is very, very important. So I think that's all I had to show with you today, is to give you just a framework on where we're at in terms of this World AIDS Day, and also to frame some of the conversations and the presentations by the next speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the speakers. I'll introduce all of them, and then they can speak, and then we have a panel discussion and questions and answers thereafter. So we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Bisra Abraham to join us. And she's an infectious disease physician, and she serves now as the Director of Clinical Operations and Technical Assistance within the Bureau of HIV/AIDS Prevention and Control at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. As everybody knows, one of the truly stellar departments of health in this country, if not in the world. And she has extensive training in infectious disease and in public health. She did a fellowship at the CDC. And she's very involved in trying to develop and support a lot of the innovations that are ongoing in our city in relation to HIV, control of HIV. Our second speaker will be Dr. Jessica Justman. And Jessica is a Senior Technical Director at ICAP and Associate Professor of Medicine in Epidemiology here at the School of Public Health. And she oversees evaluation, clinical, laboratory, strategic information, and health system strengthening services at ICAP. And she also has served as the principal investigator for the population-based HIV impact assessment, the FIA project, and she'll tell you more about that project in a few minutes. And then lastly, we want to welcome Isaac Beckford. He's a New Yorker, although I just learned he actually was born in Florida. But he's now a true New Yorker, and he's a graduate of the University of Maryland in College Park, and he currently works in public administration here in the city of New York. He's a strong advocate for the power of pre-exposure prophylaxis for PrEP, and to improve the lives and help other people and help others in confronting the HIV epidemic in the U.S. And he's also been a part of our work in the Harlem community at the Harlem Prevention Center, which is one of the sites where ICAP works here in the city. So I'm going to now invite Bisrat, and thank you.